What's up, everyone? Online prep coach Alex Kiko here with theprepcoach.com. Today, seminar breaking down T2, right? The thyroid hormone metabolite that we don't really talk about too much. And it actually has a lot of merit. I made some videos on T2 supplementation way back in the day, and it came up in conversation the other day with a client, and I realized I don't have any content on that for this paid group. So obviously, got to add that to the list. And that's the cool thing about this. It just keeps going and going for this TPC Army site. It's gonna keep thriving because there's so many things that I just sometimes forget that I haven't talked about here. So T2, right? It's kind of an odd one to write out. We're looking at 3, 5, diodo, L, thymine. I believe I spelled that potentially wrong. But we are looking at T2. Now, T2 is interesting because it's essentially a metabolite of T4 and T3 metabolism. So this is going to be more on a metabolite aspect. And technically, we only produce mainly, like if you're the majority of individuals, regardless of age, gender, there's a lot of things taken into consideration. We're basically at literally one microgram per day. So you produce about 1 microgram per day of T2, which is interesting because when we use it in application, we're looking at 50, 100, 300, 400 micrograms, but that's gonna make sense in a second. So if we look at this, what's the difference, right? What's the difference between T4, T3, T2, and even furthermore than that, what's going on electronically? So as you guys know, I really, to understand drug metabolism, true pharmacokinetics and dynamics, to understand these peptides, pharmaceutical supplements, everything out there, you have to understand these from a subatomic particle aspect. And that's where we look at the actual electron clouds and what's going on from an electronic aspect, because that'll change how they actually interact with the receptors. That'll change their ultimate end fate, and it kind of dictates what a drug or supplement or peptide can actually do. So let's, very basic, right? And this is gonna make sense. T4, why is it called T4? Because it has 4 iodine atoms. Makes sense, right? They all have the same backbone, right? That benzene background, 2 benzene backbones with an actual oxygen. So those are all the same. And then the addition from there is the number of iodines. So that would mean T3 has to have 3 iodine atoms, and T2 would have to have 2 iodine atoms. And again, all of these have that benzene and oxygen backbone, right? So this is going to be the basis for all of them. And then we basically shift around, that's called deiodinization. So the whole deiodanase enzyme aspect is very, very massive and so important, because if you look at deiodanase enzymes, like active T3 can't actually work in a certain tissue if the deiodanase enzymes are not active in that area. So let's kind of talk about that again really quick. If we look at T4, we're looking, I'll put it down here. It's these deiodanase enzymes that allow thyroid to be active locally. So if you do not have the underlying enzymes, the upstream hormone cannot work. So again, let's say on blood work, and this is why blood work is transient and only matters so much and really matters for you. If you have a T4, actually, you know what? The level doesn't even matter because we can't even talk about that. Let's just say locally, because we can't test it for blood work, right? If you have a T3 level in your biceps, it's very high, but low T4 levels in the biceps specifically, then the deiodanase enzymatic action will be low there, and then that bicep won't be as metabolically active, and therefore might get fat. So it's one of the potential theories and reasons out there why people will gain fat in certain body parts and other people won't. Like some people always have shredded legs year round. Other people always have abs year round. A lot of that could be local amounts of deiodanase enzymes and active T3 on that location specific. But again, blood work doesn't always add up here. So blood work, bloods, I guess that says don't always work. So yes, we are looking at total T4, total T3, and TSH levels, like total T3, total T4, I believe on the reference ranges now in the United States. We're looking for kind of mid to upper end of reference ranges. TSH closer to 2.0 to make sure thyroid gland isn't working too hard. I'm not a big fan of looking at the free levels. I mean, they're still okay, but if it's free, again, what does that mean? It means it's not in the nucleus causing genomic action. It's floating around, right? We don't care it floating around the blood and the plasma. We care about being intracellular, causing genomic action and causing epigenetic expression. So to me personally, I like to keep T3 or T4 for most people in mid to top end of the reference range, TSH around 2.0. That being said, shoot for that and then see how you feel. If you do not feel 100%, if your thyroid gland isn't activating 1,000%, you're not good to go. Energetically, fat loss wise, hair isn't good. Like if you're losing hair, losing eyebrows, like all these things can add up to a poor functioning thyroid, right? So that's what we're shooting for. Blood work, again, being kind of inferior, we can't test for T2 levels. I believe there's 1 or 2 places that do test for T2 levels, but I don't know if the assays are that accurate, number one. And number two, I think it's very few and far between that I've actually seen those assays. And I don't even know if those places are around anymore. This was probably a couple years ago. So regardless, T2 is almost forgotten. So let's take 2 steps back, right? Let's go back to the electronics. Let's go back to more of the underlying quantum side of things, right? If you understand the quantum mechanical aspect of these thyroid and of these deodorinase enzymes, of the iodine atoms, of the electrons, it makes so much sense. So we look at these 4 iodine atoms. If you have more iodine atoms, and actually I do have another marker. I'm gonna grab that so I can actually add onto there. I'll go with red, because now if we have red, I can kind of add here. It'll make a lot more sense. So you have these T4, right? 4 iodine atoms. This is going to literally cause more actual bulk. The atomic structure becomes more bulky. When it becomes more bulky, that directly improves, I'm going to put docking. In reality, remember how these work from a receptor geometry aspect. It's all about geometry, so mathematics, and really magnetism that allows the ligand. So we're gonna have, I'll just put T4. The ligand is the hormone, right? There's the T4 molecule. And here is going to be the receptor. And then we're gonna talk about what that is in a second. But whenever the ligand, the T4 hormone, the molecule comes in and binds, it fits in there. So it transports, it fits in there, and it technically docks, it tethers, kind of like a spaceship. Like if you've ever seen Star Trek, it docks, it tethers, and it moves around, right? Once it geometrically clicks in, it'll create a magnetic field around the entire receptor, and then it allows itself to transport whatever the actual signal is, which tends to turn on, we're gonna say, epigenetic expression, right? So bulkier iodines of a T4 means it has a better ability to bind and send a signal. That doesn't mean that T4 is like the best thyroid hormone. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means it has more receptor affinity and therefore better end chemical action. But what it expresses is different than T3 and different than T2. So again, better docking just doesn't automatically mean better, but in this conversation, that's just how you rank them. So now going back, T3, okay, if it has less bulk because there's less iodine atoms, so we're going to say less bulk in comparison to our T4, and what's gonna happen? You're still gonna have good docking, but it's going to be more moderate docking, right? And that makes sense given what we just talked about. So then T2, electronically, when I say electronically, by the way, I don't mean like video games, we're talking about the number of electrons, right? So this is more looking at things from a quantum engineering aspect, and that's what, to me, kind of makes sense. But either way, so 2 iodine atoms, that means we're going to have the least amount of bulk from an electronic aspect, which means it has the lowest amount of docking. So the interesting thing about this is it doesn't equate to dosing, right? Because if it did, then you would see this would have to be the highest, this would be in second, that'd be in third place. So T4 technically would be the lowest dosed one. And in reality, most T4 doses are, depending on the person, 50 to 150 micrograms. T3 is more like 6.25 micrograms to 25, 37.5 micrograms. And then T2 could be 50 to like 600 micrograms. So there's a massive range. And again, those aren't exclusive numbers, but we kind of see T3 being the lowest dose molecule, and then T4 being the second tier up above that, and then T2 being the highest dose molecule. So it doesn't exactly add up with its bulk from an electronic aspect. But we see this is happening, right? So now let's take a step further. T4 and T3 are more agonists, right? Whereas T2 is an allosteric modulator. That makes everything different. So what we're gonna do, I'm dropping everything. I'll put this over here. This will be example 1. And this is going to be example 2, right? So we're gonna draw the same thing. So this is going to be the receptor. Again, no, I'm not 6 years old. I just can't draw. This is the receptor, and then this, I'll actually draw it in red. This is what that is, which we are about to talk about. Okay, so T4 and T3, they are agonists. So when you have an agonist, we're gonna go T4, T3, these are agonists. So these agonists are going to have the classical binding phenomenon that occurs. What that means is this is kind of your on and off switch. Again, not that simple, but usually agonism turn on, antagonism turn off. So these classically bind and dock traditionally, right? That makes sense. An allosteric modulator means it does not bind classically, it binds in an unclassic fashion. So T2 is over here. T2 is an allosteric modulator. Again, that allosteric modulator will then come in here. It's actually going to change the shape of the receptor, which is pretty freaking cool because that means we can have ultimate end action via a different cascade, right? Now, while it's changing the shape of the receptor, it can be a positive, negative, or a neutral allosteric modulator. Now, T2 happens to be a positive allosteric modulator. So it's coming in via a different route to turn on this receptor to cause downstream effects. Now, technically, if we're looking at T2, it is going to be interacting really with other proteins and different organelles, which is very different. So the allosteric modulation now means, ooh, okay, T2 is more working from these proteins and organelles, more from an intramitochondrial aspect. So this is all happening allosterically modulating within the mitochondria. And if we want to be specific, we're looking at complex 4, which is pretty awesome. Because if we kind of go back, remember our mitochondria, I ran out of room, so I guess I'll draw it over here. I'll do it in red. Remember, we have complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, complex 4. And we have the ultimate ATPase spin that accounts for that skipping of electrons to eventually not just spit out your ATP, but also then to spit out, it actually doesn't go straight to H3O2. And technically, although you could be looking at that like exclusion zone water production here, we are also looking at what we like to call plasma, which is basically ether, which is cool because if you scroll back from there, you're looking at our internal environment, our cells, literally being what space is made up of. So you can kind of look at like cells as being a microcosm of the universe. I know that sounds pretty trippy, but if you kind of backwards and reverse engineer it, that's kind of what you get. So T2 is actually modulating right here. So complex 4 to me is a very special part of the mitochondria. We tend to see breakdown in complex 1 and 4. Usually 2 and 3 are pretty good. I don't see a lot of people that have issues with complex 2 and 3, which I'll get to in a different video, but usually complex 1 and 4, because you have the start and the end, which really makes all the difference of where electrons are being skipped, because while they're skipping, remember, we are going to be pumping out protons from this actual space. So protons are being pumped out while electrons are being skipped through. So T2 is here to drive this whole process. Now, obviously, I ran out of room, so I'm going to have to, here, screenshot real quick. Boom. And then we will go ahead, we'll erase this, talk a little bit more about T2. But automatically you can see that T2 to me really isn't even, I mean, it's obviously part of the thyroid complex, but I see as being more of a mitochondrial player. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of misunderstand what's going on with it, right? And how to actually properly utilize it. Because if you're improving that, so T2, the basic benefits that you would get, right, are kind of similar to every other mitochondrial peptide out there. Meaning what's gonna happen? If you see T2 having these massive upregulations in mitochondrial complex 4 in the electron transport chain, what does that mean? That means we are directly going to increase beta oxidation. We're going to potentiate our endogenous or exogenous T4 and T3 actions. That means we are going to increase lipolysis. Given the changes to complex 4, we will produce more, again, I'm saying exclusion zone water, but we can name it plasma, we can name it ether, we can name it a bunch of different things. That living structured water, it's endogenously produced. That's what I'm referring to when I put that there, even if it might not technically be correct. That hexagonal structure that carries information, that's what we're talking about, right? It improves that, which then directly will go ahead and improve processing, overall communication, which then connects via tunneling nanotubules, mitochondria to cells. So now you get a big renewal on things like NRF2. NRF2 can then go through the whole cascade along with nitric oxide to go ahead and do what? Drive up things like autophagy, drive up mitochondrial cleaning. So I'm just gonna put cleaning, but that's whenever your mitochondria will produce the enzymes like superoxide dismutase to go ahead and clean itself. And the list kind of goes on and on. So T2 to me is more like basically like almost like a mitochondrial peptide, mitochondrial metabolite, mitochondrial something, whatever word you want to put there, right? It's a mitochondrial molecule. That sounds a little bit more specific, right? So if you go down this list, that means that this supplementation with T2 could come in place where? Trying to lose body fat, trying to improve longevity, trying to improve from an injury, trying to like fill the blank, anything you need to drive mitochondrial pressure up, this can come in. Now, that being said, because we have so many mitochondrial players on the market, I don't think that if you're a healthy individual, I don't think T2 should come in all the time. It shouldn't be a background dose, right? But if you're someone who is on thyroid replacement, and let's say TSH is super high, you're taking your T4, T3, things aren't converting, you're not feeling good, I would bring in T2 and then it could be a replacement dose. So depending on how you want to do that, depending on if you're sick or if you're healthy, that kind of dictates. If you are sick and need that pressure, that could be your chronic new thyroid player or addition. Whereas if you're healthy, it can be brought in a rotational fashion. And so if we're in this kind of sick world, I'm actually going to erase all of this because I want to give you guys some dosings and some protocols here, because T2 is definitely kind of a finicky one. So we're going to give some examples, right? Now with T2, we're going to begin in the dysfunctional world because I think that makes the most sense. Let's say person 1 is going to be dysfunctional, and we're specifically talking about thyroid dysfunction, right? So if they are going to be dysfunctional, let's just make this simple, and let's say they have a T4 and T3 medication already in. Let's just say it's easily dosed at 150 to 25 micrograms. If you're there, right? And what will we see on blood work if things might need to bring in like a thyroid, like a T2 player, right? Maybe we have these players in and TSH might be something like 4+. Remember, we want it 2.0. So thyroid gland is still working. Something's going on here, right? Maybe we have a reverse T3 of 12+, right? In reality, reference ranges, I believe, start at 12, right? We want it 8 or low. I technically want 0. Reverse T3 is there for whenever you're in a coma to keep you kind of not burning through substrate to keep you alive. We're not in a coma, right? So reverse T3, TSH, and then depending, and this is the hard one to really see, these T4 and T4 plasma, or T4 and T3 plasma levels can be almost anywhere. I have seen a high TSH, a high reverse T3, and either T4, T3 showing hyper or hypothyroidism. So from a glandular-based aspect, it doesn't make sense. How can that be happening? Mainly because the underlying substructure electronically of the T2 is not there. So I do not know if this is proven in the research, but I do believe to a certain extent, certain people will not get that co-release of T2, and then that throws everything off upstream. So if we can kind of think about that for a second, right? If you have really T2, to me, it's T2 and deodoinase enzymes. Those are the baseline players that allow T3 to work actively in a specific site, that allow T4 to drive deodoinase stimulation because the enzymes have to be there to allow T4 to work. I think these are the most baseline players. And then if you go up that pyramid, I kind of see T4 and then T3, if we kind of want to make it like this pyramid scenario. Now that being said, this does not mean that you need T4 supplementation before T3. This just means that if we're looking upstream from there, what these two hormones are relying upon are T2 metabolism and deodoinase enzyme metabolism. If you are efficient, because there's people watching this, right, that are taking, or they're taking T3, Cytomel, or they're taking just T2 and they're perfect. If that's you, that means endogenously, you already have a robust deodoinase enzymatic system. The people that do not have to go ahead and take T4. The people that take T4 get worse responses. It's because this system's already taken care of and they can skip it and go straight to T3. So if we kind of look at it from the baseline up, that's why depending on where T2 is at, it can kind of dictate where T4 and where T3 is at, not just in plasma and blood, but how it's actually working in the body. And that's why we can have different reference ranges. So because of that, if you are this individual right here, this dysfunctional person with these kinds of markers, I would probably begin something like, again, if we're looking just at T2, not looking at iodine, not looking at all these other players you could bring in here, like thyrogens and things like that, I'd probably put T2 at 150-ish to 200 micrograms, which is a pretty decent size, pretty decent amount. So 150 to 200 micrograms, and we're looking at T2. Now, again, doses can go up higher than that. We produce 1 microgram per day, but supplementally, to get the chemical pressure we need, if our T2 levels are not there, it needs to be fairly robust because of how poor the binding is, going back to the electronics of it, which is going back to the quantum mechanical side of things. So this is roughly what we're looking at here. We're kind of bounce around, but I'll get back to that in a second. If we go to option 2, this is someone who is overall healthy and good to go. By the way, after you find your right levels, you should be feeling amazing. Then you go ahead and you retest these. TSH, once you change it and once you get your best and you're feeling your best, this should be less than 2.0 Reverse T3 should be ideally less than, this should be less than 6 at this point, but less than 8 is good. And then these will be wherever they fall, but we mainly care about the actual feedback, biofeedback on that. So how you feel energetically, no hair loss, great libido, sexual function, like everything's going amazing, right? Now, if you're healthy, and let's say on blood work, there's no problems, right? So we're gonna say no issues on labs, no exogenous thyroid. So if you are this person, when does T2 make sense to be brought in? Well, as our gland goes through life, right? It takes more and more wear and tear, like everything on our bodies. So there is the argument to be made to bring in T2 supplementation sporadically just to relieve some pressure off the gland. So you could go ahead, if you were trying to do this purely for longevity purposes, you could run something about, we'll say about 70, 75 micrograms 1 month on, and then 1 month off. And you just keep rotating it back and forth, month on, month off, month on, month off. That's a very simple, you could probably even stretch it to a month on, 2 months off. You'll find your pattern, but from a longevity aspect, this is only going to relieve pressure off your thyroid so that you'll decrease how long it will take you potentially to have to take T4, T3, which it's not that big a deal if you have to, but we're trying to preserve our glands. Ideally, if this was 100 years ago, we wouldn't need any of this. We'd be functioning perfectly. We're trying to take, I hate saying we're trying to take as little as possible, but from like a health aspect, we were trying to take as little as possible to perform like we would have been in nature, with the caveat that we're trying to be superhuman. Everyone in this group, if you're watching this video, everyone's trying to be superhuman, which then supersedes and changes the equation. But baseline longevity is our trying to baseline health of our ancestors, which is what we're trying to do here, right? But then we complement it, obviously. So that's longevity, roughly. If you're trying to use it for a fat loss phase, that's where you can go from 75 to 115 micrograms. You can even go upwards of about 400 micrograms per day. You do not get stimulated like you would with the T3. This is more like the actually change to millivoltage from mitochondrial aspect. So this is going to be increases complex 4, which means your increased millivoltages. Remember, we want about 150, negative 150 to negative 200 millivolts. So that means if you bring this player in at the lower dose and you're good while taking your MOT-C or SS31 or whatever, and you work it up, it's gonna be increasing your millivoltages. So keep an eye on overspinning and hyperpolarizing, right? So that's a very big thing to point out. But from an overall longevity aspect, fat loss aspect, that's how we're kind of looking at doing it. And this would stay in the entire fat loss phase. You're doing this until your fat loss is done, basically, which 12 weeks, 20 weeks, no big deal at all. No need to really, there's no need technically to taper, but at the same time, because this will drive a good amount of beta oxidation and fat loss, it's like you're adding calories back in. And so I'd rather do that slowly. So technically, once you're done, however you worked up, if you went from 150 to 300 to say 450, then taper back, go back to from 450 to 300 for 2 weeks, then back to 150 for 2 weeks, then kind of pull it out. Rough tapering scenario. And again, you don't necessarily have to do that. I just think it's good practice. I think that makes sense. We wouldn't all of a sudden stop dieting and then add 2,000 calories back in. We wouldn't stop dieting and drop all of our cardio. It just doesn't work that way, or just get fat again. So that's generally how you can do it. And then you could layer it in intermittently during your off season or during a caloric surplus or during any kind of phase where you're trying to actively gain weight and gain a little bit of muscle tissue. So there's a lot of ways you could do this, because remember, if it's potentiating your T4 and T3 endogenously, that means if you're stimulating the thyroid axis, you're stimulating the somatropic axis. So this will also get more potentiation out of your growth hormone peptides, pretty much everything. And that would be actually technically, you could do something like this from a longevity aspect. You could also do this for more like a caloric surplus phase. I think that could work out really good. And that's roughly how we would want to utilize T2. If we kind of look at it from this perspective, it could be used for the dysfunctional, it could be used for the healthy, it could be used for a lot of different reasons. It's kind of the forgotten molecule, but I don't really see it as like the forgotten thyroid molecule, even though it is driving up thyroid action and improving thyroid glandular action and recovery. I see it being more as this complex 4 mitochondrial molecule more than anything else, Works super well. That's roughly how we would utilize it. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Check out prepcoach.com. See you guys next time.